I'm here to talk about early local tourism, how it all got started here in the Lower Gorge region, and also talk a bit about how we came about having a bridge and the impact of the bridge on tourism. My name is Nagode. I earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts in photography from Rhode Island School of Design. I moved to Canyon City in 2010, starting taking photographs at the Royal Gorge in January of 2014, documenting the restoration process after the Royal Gorge fire of 2013. I published a book in 2015 of the photos I took during that year, and I do have some copies here if you're interested. I also created the historical video that's shown at the Plaza Theater at the Royal Gorge. And I created the historical timeline that is on the wall at the Visitor Center. My photos are on display in the gallery of the Visitor Center, so for me it's the longest running single-man show that I've ever had. I'm currently working on my next book, which is called After the Fire, Rebuilding the Royal Gorge Bridge and Park, and it also contains history of the Royal Gorge. So the material you're going to see today is material that I've been developing for the book. Early local tourism. Tourism is the act of traveling or sightseeing, particularly away from one's home. So our first recorded visitors were the Native Americans, and particularly the Ute tribes. They camped by the springs in the Canyon City area. They buried the dead in Temple Canyon and other locations surrounding the Royal Gorge. The first documented American visitor to travel into the Royal Gorge was Zebulon Pike. Pike and his men camped in the Canyon City area on December 5th through 9th of 1806. They wandered north in search of the headwaters of the Red River. When they reached Leadville, they thought they found it. So they started to follow it to the south. The river turned east. For the first time, they began to wonder if they were really following the Red River. On January 4th, 1807, Pike and his men entered the west end of the Royal Gorge. This photo, taken by Talbot 70 years after the Pike exhibition, shows the Royal Gorge as Pike would have seen it. Of course, without the railroad survey guys in front. Behind them, you can see what Pike saw, vertical walls of rock rising up from the river. In the 1800s, the world was coming out of the Little Ice Age. Temperatures were much colder than they are today. Ice over the Arkansas River would become thick enough to carry the weight of a man walking across it. The only way to walk through the gorge was on the frozen ice. Unfortunately for Pike, he was too early in the winter season for the frozen ice to hold a man's weight. He wrote, "Near night I came upon a place where the rocks were perpendicular on both sides, and no ice, except a narrow border, was on the water." So this was January 4th, 1807. Pike and his men gave up and proceeded to climb out. This painting by Ed French depicts Pike carrying 70 pounds of baggage as he climbed the gulch where the incline railroad is located today. When Pike reached the top and looked to the east, he discovered that he was right back where he started in Canyon City. The Red River turned out to be the Arkansas River. The next documented visit to the area was the Stephen Long expedition in 1820. With the expedition was Samuel Seymour, the first American artist to make the earliest known sketches of the Royal Gorge. The expedition traveled into the Royal Gorge until the steep-walled canyon stopped their upstream progress. I've not been able to find Seymour's sketches of the Royal Gorge. However, I did find his sketch of the Arkansas River east of the Royal Gorge. 25 years later, John C. Fremont led expeditions into the Royal Gorge region. After that, there was little interest in the Royal Gorge until the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, which ran roughly from July 1858 to February 1861. An estimated 100,000 gold seekers took part in one of the greatest gold rushes in North American history. In 1858, a major route to the Pikes Peak Gold region led to Leadville. The gateway to the gold country had Pikes Peak to the north and the Royal Gorge to the south. It was the perfect location to start a town as a supply depot for mining. Canyon City was laid out in 1858, but then the land was left idle. A new company jumped the claim to the town site in late 1859, and he put up the first building in February of 1860. According to Anson Rudd, one of the earliest settlers, there were perhaps 5 women in Canyon City, and they were treated with the greatest respect as though they were creatures from another planet. His house can be found in its original location behind the Regional Museum. In 1864, a wagon train rolled into town with 20 or so families looking to settle. Canyon City's Main Street was designed to be wide enough for oxen and wagons to make a U-turn. Canyon City officially incorporated in 1872, and the territory of Colorado became the 38th state in the Union 4 years later. Business boomed as miners passed through to resupply. These travelers were interested in stocking up and moving out. They were not interested in seeing the local scenery. For the locals, it was a different story. Mrs. Henry Sartor of Canyon City is believed to be the first white woman to visit the top of the Royal Gorge. Together with another woman and 2 young men, they took the trip in the summer of 1872. They left Canyon City at 7 o'clock in the morning and followed the stage road to Bumback Springs. In this picture here, you can see the stage road. They followed along Sand Creek and went through an area called Devil's Gap. They traveled with a horse and buggy. So this is a picture of what the buggy would have looked like in those days. And I love the way the horse in this particular picture is leaning forward to keep the buggy from rolling backwards. This photo is from a collection of photographs recently donated by Linda Nelson Zupin to the Fremont County Historical Society. Looking north, you see Skyline Ridge on the right. In the center is a stage road, a simple dirt track winding along Sand Creek. At Bumback Springs, the group left the buggy and hiked across country to the rim of the gorge. It's possible that what they did was follow the route of today's County Road 61, which is further west from where the Royal Gorge Bridge is today. This is the view they would have seen. The walk would have been about 1.5 miles each way. They ate their lunch there and then started back immediately. Even then, they did not reach Canyon City until after dark. The true birth of tourism in Canyon City occurred in 1874 with the arrival of the Denver Rio Grande Railroad. The depot was located about where Walgreens is today. The first floor had depot offices and a waiting room. The second story had 8 rooms for the hotel. In later years, this building became a private residence until it was torn down in 1956. Another important addition to Canyon City was the McClure House. Later known as the Strathmore Hotel, it was the center of social life for Canyon City. These more recent photos indicate the elegance of the interior. Today, it is the location of the neon model. Another important feature in town was the Colorado Territorial Correctional Facility. Built in 1871 as a territorial prison, it became a state prison in 1876. Today, the facility houses 816 medium security inmates. Tourists would pass the prison hoping to get a glance of the inmates in their striped uniforms. Next to the prison was the natural soda springs. A visitor who came to sample the soda water commented, quote, "We beg to suggest to the authorities of Canyon City that it does not strike the visitor favorably when he finds the building at the soda springs filled at all hours of the day with loafers, sometimes in such numbers as to almost prevent visitors from reaching the water. This is a matter that needs attention." The final attraction in Canyon City was the hot springs. Here you could soak your troubles away at the end of the day. Today the location is called the Pink House. Canyon City was now a destination spot for tourism. Now before I go on, I want to talk about the Royal Gorge name. Entrance to the Royal Gorge was wide like a canyon. So the most commonly used name was the Grand Canyon of the Arkansas. In the summer of 1874, railroad photographer Charles Savage of Salt Lake City came to Canyon City via the new Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. When Savage saw the canyon for the first time, he exclaimed, "This is a royal gorge," and started labeling his photos. Royal Gorge, Grand Canyon of the Arkansas River. The local newspaper and the railroad liked the name and started using it. This does not mean the original name of Grand Canyon of the Arkansas went away. At the end of the 1870s, two railroads fought for the right to build in the canyon. A 6,600-foot section of the middle of the canyon was determined to be too narrow to allow two sets of railroad tracks. During court proceedings, this section was legally defined as the Royal Gorge. General Palmer of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad wrote on September 15, 1877, "The Arkansas Canyon will undoubtedly be traversed by nearly every tourist coming to Colorado, and much of the California travel will come by way of Pueblo or Denver in order to take in this bit of grand scenery." On June 26, 1878, a Denver Post journalist wrote about his visit to Canyon City and the Royal Gorge. Quote, "Canyon City is 160 miles from Denver, and the ride to it via the Denver and Rio Grande Railway is replete with interest. The Grand Canyon of the Arkansas is the greatest scenic attraction in Colorado, and anyone who desires can make the trip from Denver easily in 2 days." When the journalist arrived in Canyon City, he rented a mountain buggy. The journalist and friends started at 7 a.m. For several miles, the road to Leadville was followed, winding in and out among the foothills, turning left. Where they turned to the south is not clear, but I think they traveled to the most scenic location, where the visitor center is today, or where County Road 381B comes out on the east, which is considered the free view. This is a photo of people on a picnic, and it was taken where the visitor center is today. According to the reporter, when the road apparently ceased, the charred logs of a recent campfire and the usual debris of camping out parties indicated that this was a stopping place. So even back in 1878, they had waste management issues. Hitching the buggy, they pushed their way through the clustering pines and cedars. In a few seconds, they stood awestruck and trembling upon the verge of the walls of the canyon. They drew back as to strengthen their resolve, and then ventured to look down. The Arkansas, about 50 feet in width at this point, looked no broader than a small creek 10 or 12 feet in width. The stream could be seen for miles as it followed its course towards the plains, while the roar of the rushing waters could only be distinguished by a faint murmur. This photo was taken from County Road 381B, and it shows what the gorge looked like before the railroad was built. According to the reporter, the tents of the workmen employed in grading the bottom of the canyon for the railroad looked something like handkerchiefs set out on the grass to dry. The men themselves looked like dark moving objects about the height of lead pencils. The journalist and his friend made a day of it, came back by way of Grape Creek Canyon, a 35-mile drive. They arrived at the hotel in Canyon City around 6 p.m. and had one of the most enjoyable drives to be had on this continent. Now I want to tell a tale about how important donations can be. 2 months ago, Carol McNew told me that she received a donation of photographs. 2 of the photographs were marked First Excursion and First Train through the Royal Gorge. Well, of course I was interested. I started doing research about these photographs. And the background is that on May 7th, 1879, the track of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad through the Royal Gorge was completed. In honor of the event, a few friends of the company, as well as several journalists from Denver, Colorado Springs, and Pueblo, were invited to take a ride up to this spot. It would be the first tourist excursion into the Royal Gorge. So the question was, were these photos taken at that event? I contacted my friend Larry Green, a railroad history expert, who has taught me a lot about research and sticking to the facts. Up until now, the only photo available of the engine was a blurry copy of a copy. From the detail on the original donated photo, we were able to determine that the engine was called Echo 1, the manufacturer was Hinckley Locomotive Works, and the railroad company was Profile and Franconia Notch. But if you looked up Echo 1 of the Profile and Franconia Notch Railroad, you would discover that it was a narrow gauge engine running in New Hampshire. How could this little engine be in 2 places at once? It must have been a very magical train. Another thing we noticed is that the landscape in this photo looked more like central Colorado than the lush landscape of New Hampshire. Thanks to Larry's research skills and extensive network of railroad experts, he determined that there were 2 engines named Echo 1, so it was not so magical after all. The first was built for the New Hampshire Railroad, but was diverted to ATSF and put to work in Kansas. The second Echo 1 ran in New Hampshire. Larry also confirmed that this engine was not in Colorado during the famous first excursion. In addition, the first excursion into the Royal Gorge only went as far as the temporary wooden trestle that would later be replaced by the famous hanging bridge. So this photo could not be of the first excursion in May 1879. As you can see by this comparison, the photo on the left was taken in Parkdale, where the current tourist train stops before returning. In the end, the riddle was solved. The first 2 official excursions were May 7th and May 26th, 1879. When Echo 1 was in Kansas. No excursions took place during the summer of 1879. The first mention of Echo in Canyon City was late October. Up until then, also, the excursions were limited to special out-of-town guests. Now you can imagine the local Canyon City people were a little bit peeved. So on October 27, several hundred citizens of Canyon City finally got a free ride through the gorge. They went all the way to Parkton, and it was documented that Echo One pulled the train. So the first excursion labels on these photographs meant that the first time that Canyon City residents went through the gorge. With regularly scheduled passenger service, the railroad started promoting the wonders of the Royal Gorge, just as General Palmer had predicted. From the very beginning, passenger and excursion trains would stop at the famous Hanging Bridge. The 10-minute stop would be highlighted in the train schedule. So the next part of this presentation is going to talk about the Royal Gorge Bridge. Once the railroad was completed, another popular pastime was hiking through the gorge. Now, ladies and gentlemen, don't do this at home. It's illegal to do that now. But in those days, people commonly walked the tracks, especially at least to the Hanging Bridge and back. One hot day in August 1900, T.C. Johnson, a Cripple Creek miner, walked 6 miles up the canyon from Canyon City. As he crossed the railroad hanging bridge, he looked up to watch a bird fight between an eagle and 5 kingbirds. When the birds were gone, Mr. Johnson continued looking at the majestic splendor of the canyon walls. He thought, if a Brooklyn Bridge could be built across that canyon, it would be the highest bridge in the world. He went back to Canyon City and put his brainchild down on a big piece of paper with colored chalk. The drawing occupied a prominent place in the front window of his uncle's grocery store on Main Street, and soon became the talk of the town. The drawing was later reproduced on postcards as the proposed highest bridge in the world. Here you can see a comparison between today's bridge and the first proposed bridge. Meanwhile, more tourists were coming to the top of the gorge. In this picture, you can see where the bridge was going to be, to the right where the visitor center would be, and down below, you can see some tourists standing on the rocks, looking across the gorge. Families would come and camp out on the rim. By the turn of the century, Canyon City was a prosperous town. It was supported by agriculture, oil, coal mining, and the railroad. However, Canyon City did not have the financial means to protect the top of the Royal Gorge. They were afraid it would be purchased by outside entrepreneurs and ranchers. Guy Hardy, the local postmaster and owner of the Canyon City Daily Record, started a campaign to save the gorge by turning it into a national park. He enlisted the help of Congressman Franklin E. Brooks. Yellowstone became a national park in 1872, and Yosemite in 1890. Surely the wonders of the Royal Gorge had just as much to offer. According to Hardy, if the Royal Gorge was allowed to be taken up under the homestead laws, the public would be deprived of looking into this mighty rift in the mountains. In 1905, Teddy Roosevelt's train stopped under the hanging bridge. Quote, "I've just witnessed one of the masterpieces of scenic grandeur and congratulate you of Canyon City at having it at your door." Congress turned down the National Park bill, but offered to give the land to Canyon City. On June 11, 1906, a 4-mile by 2-mile tract of land was granted to Canyon City for public use. It was named Royal Gorge Park. The bill was signed by President Theodore Roosevelt. The next idea for a bridge came from an electric railroad company. They wanted to build a bridge across the gorge as a tourist attraction. The bridge was to be constructed of steel with a floor of plate glass 1.5 inches thick. Now, I don't know how many of you have been at the Royal Gorge Suspension Bridge when it was windy. Imagine that, plate glass on the bridge. The plan was that the passengers would get off the train at the north side. The train would travel across the bridge without them, and the passengers would then have to walk across the glass bridge and reboard the train. The train would return to Canyon City by rolling downhill without the need for trolley wires. Wow, what a plan. After several attempts and change of ownership, the effort to build an electric railway failed. However, I recently learned, that is many years later, that there was a travel company that did travel brochures, and they were promoting this glass bridge as actually existing. Power of advertising. You can still see part of that railway grade from Highway 50 on the way to the Royal Gorge. As you're driving to the gorge, there's a turnout on the left as you come around the curve. And across from the turnout, right here, is the original grade for the electric railway. Doesn't go anywhere now. Remember the route the news journalist took on the rented buggy? On May 12, 1911, Canyon City celebrated the opening of the new scenic highway to the Royal Gorge Park. The new road ran across Jim Cree's cattle ranch and through the canyon named after him. Construction labor was provided by the local Colorado prison at the cost of $6,000. It was a major event. These rare photos taken at the top of the Royal Gorge show Colorado Governor John F. Shafroth at the dedication. On the top right, you see the crowd of 2,000 people, and below is the convict man from the Colorado State Prison. The new road was considered a remarkable improvement, as indicated by this cartoon of Guy Hunter, who said the new road to the top of the Royal Gorge should bring 50,000 tourists here next year. This photo shows the new Priest Canyon Road. A remarkable variety of transportation climbed up the canyon, including cars and buggies, horse-drawn wagons, motorcycles, horses, and bicycles. Some people even chose to hike the road. On the right is what it looks like today. Priest Canyon, although a big improvement, was not an easy road to take. At times, the narrow gravel road turned into a traffic jam. In some places, the road was so steep that Model T Fords had to drive up backwards to allow the fuel under the driver's seat to drain towards the engine. On a ridge along the road, Cora Beersley and Ethel Lindall McMullen built the Vista Lodge. During the early 1920s, it was the place to stop on the way to the Royal Gorge. At night, it offered dining and dancing to an orchestra or a player piano. Guests could stay overnight in the nearby furnished cabins. Alas, the Vista Lodge burned down in 1925 and was never rebuilt. The beautiful stonework walls are all that remain of those glorious days of the roaring 20s. In this photo, you can see the surrounding burned trees from the second fire disaster, the 2013 Royal Gorge Fire. In 1914, Glenn Gebhardt, an enterprising young man from Canyon City, built the Royal Gorge Pavilion. It was located on today's Visitor Center parking lot. From the pavilion, Glenn and his co-workers ran a profitable photography business capturing visitors in the park. Over the years, Gebhardt's photographs of people posing on Wonderview showed the evolution of the American tourist. He ran the summertime photo business for 10 years, earning enough money to pay for both his undergraduate and master's degree in education. The next person to take over the franchise at the Royal Gorge was Loren Forgey. He signed a contract with Canyon City to lease the Royal Gorge Curio Shop and cottages for 10 years, starting in May 1926. The lease would be extended to 15 years if Forgey would build a suspension footbridge spanning the Royal Gorge by May of 1927. This was the third proposal to build a bridge, and it didn't happen either. Meanwhile, a successful Texas promoter named Lon C. Piper was financing the construction of suspension toll bridges across the Rio Grande. His chief engineer, George E. Cole, completed the fourth bridge in 1928. On July 2nd, 1928, upon seeing the Royal Gorge, Piper commented that he could build a bridge across that. He had just the man in Cole to do the job. That evening, Mr. Piper met for the first time with the Canyon City Council. The council showed little enthusiasm. They've heard it all before. In April 1929, Mr. Piper made a formal presentation to the City Council asking for a 20-year franchise contract in exchange for financing and building the bridge. What do you think was the major item to be negotiated? Was it the type of bridge construction? Was it the railroad right-of-way overhead? Was it the buyout of the existing curio shop contract with Warren Forgey? Was it the length of the contract? Or was it the cost of the bridge? The answer is none of the above. The real item to be negotiated was road construction on the north and the south side of the Royal Gorge. Remember the celebrated Royal Gorge completed in 1911? There was no way that equipment and supplies for bridge construction was going up that road. In addition, there was no road at all to the south rim of the gorge. Here was the Priest Canyon Road. This is the new road they needed to build. In the end, Piper agreed to also finance the new road. The contract was signed on April 15, 1929. About 35 to 40 men began road construction on June 4th. Once the roads were completed, the tower foundations were poured. The 150-foot twin towers, which were completed in about 3 weeks. The first wires were lowered down from each side, attached to the bottom, and then raised. Using the initial guide wires, a cable was pulled across the gorge from large spools on each side. Once the cables were strung and secured, they began to build the deck of the bridge. Tourists continued to visit the park while the bridge was under construction. So what did they do when what do you do when there's no bridge? They climbed rocks. So I'm going to show you a video clip of a family on vacation in July of 1929. So that's what you did at the Royal Gorge as a tourist. So the bridge was dedicated on December 8, 1929. Dignitaries from all over the state participated in the ceremony. 3,000 people made it to the bridge in time for the ceremony. Mr. Kneibel, a railroad engineer who drove one of the first locomotive engines through the Royal Gorge, attended the celebration. Could the engine he drove be Echo 1? Opal Joyce, Miss Fremont County, cut the ribbon at the north end of the bridge at 3:00 p.m. The following year, Piper and Cole team completed the incline railway. In 1930, with the world's highest bridge and the steepest railway, the Royal Gorge became a world-renowned tourist attraction. People from every country had come to stand on the famous bridge. For the end of this presentation, I'd like to share some old-time videos from the 1930s. These would have been shown in movie theaters before the main feature as newsreels.
Twice a year, this bridge extending 800 feet across the Royal Gorge in Colorado gets a new coat, the riskiest painting job in the world. The daredevils who do it cling like flies to the towers 1,150 feet in the air, as high up as the top of the Empire State Building. Far below is the Arkansas riverbed, and the least slip while balancing on the giant cables means a fatal plunge into the stream. The Rocky Canyon is a beautiful picture, but the men doing the dangerous work have little time for sightseeing. The only means of getting around is sliding on the stay rods. Watch him coming down. I hope he doesn't lose his grip. Well, they may not rival Michelangelo, but the painters on this job must have nerves of steel and never slip. Towering cliffs rise high into the air, forming the picturesque setting for the Arkansas River, which winds its way through the Rocky Gorge 1,000 feet below. Daredevil Ben Mouton, whose specialty is stunting, decides to give the folks a real thrill. So he hangs a trapeze over the side of the bridge, where a slip would mean certain death. After warming up a little, he goes through the routine of a trapeze artist. You can't find anything too hazardous for Ben. It's child's play with him, and he wouldn't give up the opportunity of risking his neck for anybody. It takes a lot to amuse some people, but Ben enjoys it. His life is just one big thrill after another. It's the sort of thing that's fun to watch, but I'll take the ground for mine.
The President's special train halts in scores of western towns as thousands cheer. At Royal Gorge, Colorado, a floral tribute is presented to the Chief Executive after a speech in which he assured his listeners that he hopes to return. And so the President relaxes amid the Rocky Mountain scenery before he resumes his stomping tour for faithful New Deal congressmen. And the President looks upward, where the work of man gives him inspiration for his own gigantic task.
Thank you.